Microsoft Excel 2003, macros and other customization. Everything from customizing the way that we automate our tools with macros all the way to, hey, where do we save our files? What font do we use? That's all some customization that we're going to look at. In this video, we're going to take a look at how we create some macros, edit macros. We'll also look at the security that we need to set when we are running these macros. And then finally, something that we've kind of touched on, and it's kind of important, and we're going to talk about it here, is when we change the default settings for our Excel 2003. The first thing that we're going to take a look at are macros. Now, before you run screaming in horror from the room because you've heard all the bad things that can happen with macros, understand, macros can be our friends. It's just how you use them. Either one, you create them yourselves and only run them within your own environment, and then just don't accept any macros from people that you don't know, or at least they don't know where they came from. In other words, it's a fairly simple thing. You wouldn't take something from somebody that you didn't know where it came from, would you? Well, the same thing is true with your macros. Now, macros, really, they're just a series of commands, whether they're keystrokes, instructions, clicking, doing these things that you can use to automate things into one single command. So you can do things like maybe calculations, format text, you can sort data, consolidate it, do all these things with these macros. You can even loop the macros so they run continuously until they come to the end, maybe with a blank cell. But let's show you the first thing that we need to know about our macros is that they are under the tools. And here we have macro, and here you can see your available macros, record a new macro, security, which we'll see momentarily, and which is really important, the Visual Basic Editor, because here is really where it operates and where it becomes a big important thing. So if I want to create a macro from scratch, all I need to do is come in here and say, okay, let's create one. It's going to be running for my Excel for book 1. Now, the one thing about macros is that they need to operate within a module. You need to kind of place them into a box. So we're going to put them into this module. So I've created my first module, and here I would then type in sub, which all sub means is this is the subject or the name of this particular macro that we're going to do. So let's say I want to call this Chris1. So that's going to be my first macro that I'm going to use, and so I go ahead and place that in, add some open-ended parentheses saying this is end, and notice it's very nice. It even says we're going to end the subline there. Now anything I type in between here is going to be the code that is going to run. Now one of the real more popular ones, and trust me, I'm not a Visual Basic expert by any stretch of the imagination, but there's a few things my friends have learned, and I've even learned from CBT Nuggets. One of them is message box. So message box allows me, if you notice, once I type it in, it says, oh, you want to put in a prompt. And then it can give me like an OK. So this will pop up anytime I run this particular macro. And I can then use this as part of something else. So I would put in the quotation marks and what it's going to say. What's the prompt going to be? And we'll say CBT Nuggets appreciates your business. And put that in parentheses. Okay? Now, once I've done that, and I can go ahead and hit enter, and it drops it down, I now have this particular a little bit of code that can run. And if I want to test it, all I need to do is come up here and say, hey, do you want to run this sub user form? Now, when I click on this, it's going to do the little dink, and it shows you what it would look like when it runs. CBT Nuggets appreciate your business. Okay, and this would just be an example of a macro that we could run. So I can click OK, and it brings it back here. Now if I want, I can then save it, and that way it'll save all this information in here. Or another thing that we can do is we can record one of these macros. So let me go ahead and close that, come over here, and now what I'm going to do is go to Tools, Macro, and I'm going to record a new macro. Now this one is going to be called, what are we going to call it? We'll call this one make a box. And you notice I don't add any spaces. It doesn't like spaces. If you want a space, you need to use the underline. Make a box. Something like this. You can then say, I want to make a shortcut key, which you can put on here. Now understand, if I put like Control capital letter S here, that's a shortcut that's used normally by Excel to save a file. But now as soon as I do this, that will overwrite that. And now when I hit Control S, it will then say, okay, run this make a box particular macro. And I probably won't want to do that. So let's go ahead and just say, no, we don't want one of those. Store the macro in this workbook, or I can do a new workbook or create my own personal macro workbook that'll contain all these macros that I want. So we'll stick with this workbook. It'll give you a description. In this case, it just tells me then I can type in a description. This will put a blue box on the worksheet. You can put any description that you want. So we go ahead and click OK. And then you'll see what happens at the pause and the stop menus for your macros here. You also have relative reference and stop recording. So it's recording right now everything you do. If you click on relative reference, that means that it will go anywhere. You can do this anywhere on your worksheet. Now what I'm going to do now is that I've clicked that, I'm going to insert a box. So I'm going to hit a rectangle here. I'm going to go ahead and bring it right here. And then I'm going to say I want to create it. And I said a blue box. Now I'm going to make a mistake just to show you how this works. And let's say I go in here and I put in blue. Or we said that's blue, so let's do green. I'll do green by mistake. So I'll make it like this nice green. And then I go ahead and I hit stop recording. Well, now I've recorded that particular macro. And I say, hey, I wonder if that runs. So let me go ahead and delete the box. So I've now completed. All I did was select it and click on delete. And now I come up here, tools, macros. Notice you also have a shortcut, Alt plus F8 will open it up. And it says, well, look at all these macros I have. I have Chris1, or if I run that, it will do that. CBT Nuggets appreciates your business. But I'm going to go ahead and do make a box. And I run it. Oh no, it's green. I didn't want it to be green. So what can I do? I can come up to my tools, to my macro, open up my macros, and now when I select it, I can say I want to edit that macro. Now, as soon as I do that, it's going to open up and say, hey, in Module 2, I now have a new macro here under my modules. It's a make a box macro. And then I say, this will put a blue box on the worksheet. Well, I made the problem of making it green, and that's because of the scheme color. And the scheme color is actually supposed to be 12. Notice it recorded all of my steps, and I made the mistake of changing it to green. So what am I going to do? I'm going to remove this particular information right here. So I'm going to say, all right, let's get rid of this. I'm going to delete this. So I've now deleted this. Oop, forgot one piece there. Delete this too. And now that's the end. Now I'm going to go ahead and you can save this. And I can save it as a separate book if I want to, do whatever I want. But in this case, I'm going to close it. And now I'm going to try to run that macro again. Let me go ahead and let's see if I did it correctly. I think I deleted the right one, macros. And this time we do make a box. And I click run. And look at that. I've now created my blue box instead of the green box that I originally decided to do. And so again, this is all we're doing right here is just showing you how we can use these macros and run them in order for us to automate anything that we want to do. In this case, I want to make a whole bunch of blue boxes. Now, can I copy and paste this blue box and do the same thing? Yes, I understand that. I'm just using a very simple example just so you can see how this operates. Now, we also have to warn you. Now, I know we kind of kidded around running screaming from the room earlier on, but macros can be dangerous. They can contain some nasty code that can then run and you can get yourself in a world of hurt. And so we don't want that to happen in that case. So what we are going to do is go ahead and set the settings for security. Now, we do that under Tools, Macro, under Security. Now, right now, by default, all you need to do is look at security level. And it says right now it's high. Only signed macros from trusted sources will be allowed to run. Unsigned macros are automatically disabled. Now remember, when I was creating my macro, it said it was who it was created by. I was creating the macro in my own workbook, and so of course it's going to trust it. If I wanted to, and by the way, it will not allow you to run any. When you go on Medium, you can choose whether or not to run any macros. And this is what some people do when they're receiving them from friends who maybe didn't sign them or do them right, but you know that that person created it. This will allow you to choose to do that. If you do very high, only the trusted locations will run. This means the digital signatures and everything else that you need to have needs to be, it needs to be very high. You need to make sure that you're trusting things. You can also have trusted publishers, which again give you the ability to say, hey, where do you trust all these add-ins and templates that come from Microsoft or from your friends, the access to Visual Basic Project, you can trust these. And notice it says, hey, virus scanners are installed and ready to look at these if in case that there are some nasty bits of code. I recommend leaving it at high, or if you're in an environment where you need to decide whether you can do it, go ahead and go with the medium. And this is, again, the security levels that are set for running macros in your Office 2003, or in this case, the Excel 2003. So we say we'll keep it at high, it's okay, and we're set and ready to go. Now that we've taken a look at macros and kind of see how they work, how we record them, edit them, and of course we can even delete them if we want to Tools, Macros, we open up our macros and we say, you know what, I want to get rid of the make a box. I can just simply delete them here. Or the one where it says, hey, CBT Nuggets, the message box, I can delete that. So I click delete. It says, are you sure you want to delete the macro? I say yes. And now it's not available to me for being able to run. When we've shown you some of the things that we do here in our video series on Excel, a few things that we've done is we've changed certain options. And you see me come up here to Tools, and we've gone to Options. And I've said that look at all these things, and it's kind of beyond the scope of this particular course video series to really show you all the different things you can do. However, I do want to show you at least a few of them that are necessary, especially if you're going to be operating in the world of the certification, because they do expect you to know how to modify certain default settings. One of them is, and most of them are right here on the General tab. The first thing that we want to be able to do is change the number of sheets that we put in a new workbook. Right now, the default's 3. You notice anytime you open up a brand new workbook, it's 1, 2, 3. Well, you can also change the number right here on the General tab. Maybe we want to add 5 to every single one of these. And maybe we want to change the standard font. The standard font is Arial that's being used on each one of these. Well, you can choose from any of the available ones, and again, this is on my computer, so your fonts could be different based upon what you have. Maybe I don't like that. Maybe I like the Times New Roman. Now, I know for sure that that is actually on everybody's because it's a standard Microsoft font. Times New Roman, and let's say we want to do 12, and that will be the setting up. Now, we can also the default file location is really where you want everything to go when you click the save or save as. This is where it opens up automatically. It's going to go boop. This is where you want to save your files. Well, right now it's under the My Documents. That's fine. We can do that. And we can also change the username here. If I didn't want to use my name and I wanted to use, I don't know, somebody else's name, I can do that. Remember how in the initial time it said, hey, whose edition of Excel 2003 was this, and you put the information and the initials and things like that. Well, you can change how it appears on the comment boxes and who created this macro and who did that just by changing the username here, where we could do it and I could type in maybe Chris Stevens. I can use my alias if I wanted to. But in this case, I don't mind using my name, so I'll just stick with the Chris Ward. And again, if you do this, now what will happen is, and it says at startup, open all files in. Well, what's this all about? Well, what this does is specify a folder that when you start Excel, the program automatically opens up any files that are stored in this folder. So you can say, if I wanted to go to My Documents, now of course I have a ton of Excel spreadsheets, it would then go and automatically open up every Excel file that's in that particular thing. So I would just type in C:, whack, documents and settings, whack, trainer, whack, my documents. And I would just continue. I could put whatever folder. So any files that were in there, Excel spreadsheets, workbooks that I have in there, would just open up automatically whenever I started up Excel 2003. I don't want to do that, so we'll go ahead. But let's see what happens now that I've changed these options. So now my standard font's Times New Roman. I open up 5 sheets in my new workbook. I click OK, and it says, all right, you must quit and then restart Microsoft Office Excel. No problem. I click OK. So now what I do is I file and I go ahead and exit out, and it says you want to change, make the changes. We'll say no, and so now I'm back here. So I go Start, All Programs, Microsoft Office Excel, and now it comes up and it opens up and it runs the whole thing and it gives me my getting started. Let me close that, and look what happened. I now have 5 sheets, and my font is now in Times New Roman 12. So when I start typing in hello, that is definitely different than the old font. The old font was Arial. So we'll come back up here to Arial, which is at the top, and it was 10, right? This was what the old font was. Notice the difference? Not only does it give you the Times New Roman as the font that appears as text here, it's also how it appears in all of your, your numbers here for your rows and for your cells. That all shows up as in the Times New Roman's font as well. So it's some interesting ways to change the defaults on your particular workbooks. And this is again done from the Tools, Options on the General tab. Remember that. That's where you're going to need to find for that. A couple other things that I did want to show you for this. Your security settings for your macro security can also be reached from the Security tab here, as well as what we talked about, the password to open. And another thing that I find that, quite interesting is that when people start talking about the error checking is where we can customize the different types of rules that we have. And we showed this at the very beginning of the video series, but I want to touch on a couple of things here as well. Again, mostly from an exam standpoint, and I want to make sure that you understand it. When you do look at error checking, whenever you do any of these rules, you can then set the different indicator colors if you want to. Remember, I set mine for red. And right here, formula is referring to empty cells. Right now, it didn't do anything. It didn't give you warning errors. It just demonstrated them. Now, if I click on that, I've now set that rule set up. So to change the rules for your error checking, you need to be on the error checking tab in the options. I know, it makes sense, right? But sometimes the little simple things might reach back and grab you. And so we want to make sure that you understand that when you are making any changes to your options where the error checking is. So we click OK, and now we see that we have set up the default settings have been changed. So what did we accomplish here in this video? Well, number one, we took a real quick drive-by, a flyby, whatever you want to call it, on how to create our macros. We learned how to edit them. We learned how to record them either by doing the task or going into Visual Basic and writing them out. We also saw because they can and are part of being Visual Basic and running that kind of code, you have to be very secure. And so you can set those security levels high, only make it trusted sources, or if you want to manually go ahead and decide on whether to run a macro, you just go ahead and click on the medium setting. Then finally, we took a look at some of the options that we have where we can customize our version of Microsoft Excel 2003. Very important ones, how to change the defaults for how many worksheets, where you save your files, and the font that's used when creating your worksheets. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.